Hey, everybody, and welcome to Comics and Cinema. I'm your host, Alex Klein, and today we've got a pretty exciting show for you guys. We are talking to you from the past, and by we, I mean me and our good friend Kevin. Kevin, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Alex.
Yeah, of course. So we're going to be talking again. We are talking through the time stream. We are pre-recording this. We've got some vacations coming up, but I wanted to get this episode out the week of Thor: Love and Thunder coming out, which is so we're basically recording a week and a half behind. So who knows what's going to happen this next week? But all I hope for is that neither of us get spoiled by this movie at all. And I've been doing pretty good so far. This movie, before we get into it, feels a lot different than Doctor Strange in terms of, I mean, I haven't heard any, and they had the premiere that was on Thursday, and I have not seen any talk about this movie, which is great.
Yeah, I definitely feel the expectations are much different because the connotations of multiverse of madness, like what that could mean, and then obviously once with No Way Home, with all the rumors of all the additional Spider-Man happening in there, it built up all these expectations and all these leaks and everything of and rumors and whatnot. And I feel like we haven't had too many of those for Thor, just generally speaking. Like we haven't had too many leaks and things like that. And then yeah, just like the nature of the film just doesn't feel, not that it won't be big, it just doesn't feel as like, oh, this could be like a big thing to the extent that Doctor Strange was or wasn't, like it doesn't have that weight around it, so I feel like people maybe are less like inclined to like be finding all the little details that are going to be happening in this beforehand.
Yeah, and I wonder if the multiverse itself is a piece of that, because I feel like the craziest leaks came from Doctor Strange and Spider-Man, which both had that multiverse sort of thing. Because I think with the multiverse, it's like, what other actors are going to show up in this movie, and
Right.
that's like the beginning of the hunt. But then you uncover all the other spoilers, and that all gets spoiled. But none of that's taking place in this movie, so I think people are kind of just either they're sitting on it or they're tired of being spoiled and finally catching up with the rest of us and not bothering with it. But the other thing I wanted to bring up as well, Kevin, is I was thinking last night, and I told you about this, so pardon me saying it again, but like I said, I've scheduled out my shows now for probably the next couple months. Almost got the full year planned out, and Obi-Wan Kenobi never fit into that algorithm, and I don't know why. Well, we're gonna find out why here in shortly in just a second. But I thought to myself, oh well, maybe I can just record another episode of it. But I said, I don't think I'd have a lot to talk about, and I don't know if I'm in the minority of that, but I figured we could kick off this Thor episode, Thor comic book episode, talking a little bit about Obi-Wan Kenobi. For those of you that are fans of the show, who have watched the show one way or another, I'm a huge Star Wars fan, and I think you are too, Kevin. And this, like I said, we won't spend too much time on it because I've always been of the motto, if you don't have anything nice to say, to not say anything at all. And I do have a few nice things to say about this show. But to start off, just by saying that it looks like Kevin really didn't like the show, which is fine. Like I said, I'm leaning into that path as well. And I'll pull him back in here now. Welcome back, Kevin. I was letting everyone know, I think you hated the show based on you just bailing the minute we started talking about no pressure. But so what I was going to do is we'll just do a quick, I'll not even a synopsis for those of you that have seen it. I'll brief spoilers. I mean, there's really no spoilers in this except for one spoiler if you've seen the first episode of the show. I just want to get some thoughts off my chest on it so that it's recorded. But that, again, I don't feel the need of spending an entire thing on it, which is ironic because I was not like a super fan of Book of Boba Fett, but I still saw fit to have a whole episode on that. And we had Brian on and we talked for almost 2 hours about that show. Talking with Brian, rewatching that show, I was like, wow, this is a really good show. I liked it a lot. Still not as much as like Mando, but it was good. It was really good. But when I watched Obi-Wan, I only watched each of the episodes once. I felt no need to go back and watch them again. I did go back and rewatch the Darth Vader pulling the ship from the sky, just because I was like, did I miss something there? Because I felt not even impressed by that. And it was kind of the same when I saw it a second time. And I think part of that is because the CGI was a little from the ship, which is the one area of CGI in Star Wars that you need to get right. Like, I don't care if your aliens look a little weird, like the ships need to look real. And that scene, coupled with them taking off afterwards and looking fake as they flew into space too, I was just like, I don't know. This show really disappointed me, and I think that's because back in the day when they first announced even Disney Plus, even before Disney Plus was announced, and Jason Aaron was kind of is funny enough. Maybe that's our tie-in. Jason Aaron was writing the Star Wars series for comics for Marvel, and it was a big deal. The first issue sold over 1 million copies, and he would pepper in these from the journals of Obi-Wan Kenobi. And they were these little one-issue stories of things that he was up to during that time on Tatooine. And so that was around like 2014, 2015. And I was like, man, that would be a really cool movie. I was like, I would honestly love to see what Obi-Wan Kenobi was doing. I was like, Ewan McGregor, he's still young enough where, you wouldn't really need to do any de-aging because he's kind of getting into that Obi-Wan Kenobi age of that time. I was like, it feels like it makes sense. You got Hayden Christensen, all this stuff. And then when they announced the show, I was like, see, like they knew it too. Like they knew that there were still some stories to tell. And it turns out though, and I'll get your opinion on this, I just don't think that there was a story to tell. Or maybe I don't know where they thought the story was. Because to me, the whole idea of this 6-episode series was he's supposed to be watching Luke. Leia gets kidnapped in order to get to him, to get to Kenobi himself. He rescues Leia, brings her back to Alderaan, confronts Darth Vader in the process, and nothing changes. And I'm curious, again, before I dive into any serious nitpicks, what was your thoughts on the show overall?
I thought it had its moments. I thought bits and pieces here and there were pretty good. I definitely felt by the end that, at least for me, as I know enough of the Star Wars series, but I know we have other listeners and friends who were like, this is like their lifeblood and everything. Obviously, we have Babu's freaking podcast here on the network. And like, for me, I felt, at least in the final episode, we were getting to parts where I was like trying to do like some mental gymnastics with the continuity of like, especially in like the final episode where like Luke is running away from Reva. I'm like, okay, so did he not see her as an Inquisitor? Like, he's like going up the thing, but she's there with the lightsaber. And then I feel like in A New Hope, he's like, oh, a lightsaber. Like, I've only like heard of this. So I'm like, did you not see? I don't know. Like, small things like that. Just like, I mean, I could be totally wrong. I mean, I haven't seen A New Hope in a while. So, but like, yeah, I just felt like there were just like some mental gymnastics that they were definitely fitting in a small portion of the continuity that like has a very clear, we know what happens in episode 3 and we know what happens in episode 4 with Ben and Luke and everything like that, so it was like they were it felt at times like they were trying to make something out of like a round thing into a square hole, a little bit to an extent. So
great example, or great analogy.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely felt it had some moments, and then like jokingly, like I felt like a lot of us were saying like they never did the helicopter with the they didn't do helicopters with the Inquisitor lightsabers. Like, I mean, missed opportunity just to have like some fun or whatever. I don't know, but that aside, yeah, it's like it was okay. I watched some of the episodes again after my initial rewatch because I usually watch them in the morning, and who knows how awake I was, but yeah, it was okay. I definitely felt by the end I was like, I'm ready for Mandalorian early next year.
Yeah. And I wonder if a piece of that too was the stakes are so low in this show, and they know the stakes are low, and it's like they tried to come up with random stakes in each episode, and none of them landed for me. It was like, no, okay, like Leia's captured, oh no, but we know she's gonna make it out. Like, we know every single main character in this series makes it out by the end of it because they all show up. And so it was like, oh, well, then let's kill this random side character like Tala. And it was like, cool, well, I liked her a lot, but I certainly didn't develop an emotional connection to her because, again, I was assuming anyone who was not the top billed people that they were going to die in the show because they had to have some stakes. I will say when I watched the first episode, I got super emotional while I was watching it just because I was like, wow, here we are, we're back. Which bummed me out because it immediately took me out of it too during the scene where she's being chased by the Red Hot Chili Peppers.
Yeah.
And I just, again, I liked seeing Leia, but I think I've gotten to a saturation point with the Skywalker saga, and I think that is 100% Lucasfilm's fault. But I really tried. Like I enjoyed the sequel trilogy quite a bit, but once Rise of Skywalker was over, I was like, I'm done. Like I think that was a perfect ending. Let's move on to some new ground where we have real stakes. And so I was very curious coming into this of like, what are they going to do? And it turns out there's not much they could do or wanted to do. And so seeing Leia again was nice, but at the same time, it was an immediate eye roll for me because I'm like, here we go. Here's like, if we can't see Luke during this season, we're going to see Leia. Like, did you forget that the Skywalkers are a part of this universe? And so I'll say, so we don't stay too long on it. I loved Ewan McGregor. I thought was fine in the role. He got better as the episodes went on too, as he kind of rekindled his connection to the Force. I thought Hayden Christensen was completely underutilized, and that really bummed me out. We only get to see him really once, which is in flashback format. And to their credit, too, I know a lot of people were like, they didn't even de-age him in the Attack of the Clones. But I was like, honestly, we're not getting to see him. That's fine. Like, I want to make sure that he's doing okay at his current age, and it looks like he looks great. He's doing great. Glad to see that. We see a little bit of his mask when it gets knocked off. That final fight I thought was great. Really good fight. Obviously, I don't know if it's budget or what, but like, let's make the whole fight at night. I'm not a fan of that trope either because you can't see anything, but it was cool to see the lightsabers, kind of the red and the blue. Again, the classic lightsaber colors that we've grown to love. There's just a lot of nostalgia in this show that I think had there not been any other Star Wars content released, if this had come out after episode 3 or something like that, way back when, this would have been awesome. But I feel like now we have just been so treated to, here's a secret connection to this thing, or here's a little connection that's a really big deal. But then now they're just bludgeoning us in the face with, here's really obvious connections. And it's like, the obvious stuff doesn't do it for me. I'm bigger. Like, the biggest thing that excited me in this was seeing I swear that's what it was, the Light of the Republic logo. In the path, which is part of what it was too. I mean, they called it the path in the Light of the Jedi book during the High Republic. That was the symbol for the High Republic. And so I was like, whoa, are we gonna have some like ancient Jedis in here or something like that? Never happened. But that was where I got the most excited. So yeah, like I said, doesn't deserve full episodes of my time to explain it. It was decent enough. If you're a fan of Star Wars, check it out at least. Just really had going with like the lowest expectations is what I would say, because then you might enjoy it.
Agreed.
Awesome. Well, let's pivot and get to the good stuff. So our mission this month, Kevin, was to read up on some Thor comics. So what we decided to do, again, based on the content that we feel is in this movie, we dove into Jason Aaron's Thor, which, and I spoke on this briefly before the show started, but in my opinion is the greatest Thor run of all time, but also is competing as one of the greatest comic book runs of all time. And that's because he wrote this comic consistently for 7 years and just nonstop through so many changes. You had Thor, God of Thunder, which ran for 25 issues. And then you had Jane Foster as Thor for another probably like 25 to 30, maybe even more issues. He had spin-offs of The Unworthy Thor. That was a 5-issue run about, him losing his worthiness. The Thors themselves during Secret Wars, where it was did you read that one?
No, that's
that one's really cool. That one's only 4 issues, but it's like the God Squad. All of the Thors of the multiverse are cops. And so they are like, there's certain ones like Throg is a detective, and Jane Foster and Thor are partners and they all like police all of the different places in Battle World, which was really cool concept. So it was just awesome to see him stretch his legs in that regard. Every single storyline felt a little bit different, a little new. I know we talked a bit about the Malekith storyline. It's probably my least favorite of the storylines, but it still was like, the art was great. Ron Garney did the art on that one. And I just remember I read that issue by issue as the stories came out. So I would say, I know we're going to be talking about a couple of specific ones, specifically Thor, God of Thunder, issues 1 through 12. And then the second series, Thor, which again is Jane Foster, issues 1 through 8. and the annual. But overall, Kevin, what did you think of? Because I know you said you read a bunch of it, of the other ones as well. What did you think of Jason Aaron's run?
Yeah, I liked it. I mean, hadn't really read any Thor comics ahead of this, and I remember when the Jane Foster Thor was happening, all the marketing around it, and like, oh, there's a new Lady Thor, and like, who is it, and everything, and then remember for issue 8 when it was revealed and everything like that. So I remember when all that happened, but and then I remember as the years went on, the everybody was saying, oh, it's such a great run and whatever, So starting it with, I thought it was pretty good. I enjoyed I enjoyed the God Butcher run, but I also like, I don't have any really other like Thor comics to compare it to, so like or these other writers or whatever, because like I said, I've only really read Thor in an Avengers context, at least the
Sure.
more recent stuff and whatever, so yeah, I enjoyed, like you said, I enjoyed the God Butcher run, and like, just especially knowing obviously that he's going to be in for Love and Thunder, like figuring all that out and whatnot. So doing that, I enjoyed learning all about him and like the backstory, and then like knowing, okay, figuring out what's going to be maybe moved from the comics into the MCU and whatnot, and then like you said, yeah, I did keep reading the rest of that Thor God of Thunder run just to like finish it out before you got to Jane's Thor, and that I, like you said, the Malekith story in the middle there I thought was okay, wasn't the greatest, but I did see the seeds that I knew because he's going to do the War of the Realms storyline, so I see like all those seeds that are like planted. I'm like, it's like pretty much like screaming out there. So like I wonder, like, even then, if like commentators or reviewers were like, oh, or is there, if somebody literally said War of the Realms, I was like, did they say like, is a War of the Realms like the next big Marvel event or something, like way back then or something, like who knows. But because like, I mean, obviously I have hindsight and I know what happens, but like I was reading that, I was like, oh, that's like clearly what this is, so yeah. And then the last one before the Jane run with Roxxon and the environmental stuff, like, I thought that was okay. It was an okay story. I definitely liked it more than the Malekith one, but like I thought it was pretty good. And then I didn't realize, but I've since read that he did the original Sin storyline, which is the part at the end, which is when he becomes unworthy. Which, I mean, I don't remember if I read or knew why he's unworthy, so I think that's still a spoiler potentially for me. I maybe if when I get to it, I'll be like, oh, I remember this or whatever, but from when it happened. But as far as I know, like, I don't know why he's unworthy yet, so I'm looking forward to
was
figuring that
the
out.
second biggest mystery to me of the Marvel universe. The first one being what we interviewed Kelly Thompson with, which is, what does Hammer stand for? Because they still have not told us what that is. But for the longest time, like Billy Joel would say, we didn't know. And every single time he tries to tell it, you never really hear it.
Mhm.
And it's in that Unworthy Thor 5-issue miniseries that he shares what it is. If you'd like, I can tell you, because I won't spoil it, but it does tie into this story and into both stories.
I mean, you could pass for me. I mean, like I said, I'm going to get to it at some point.
It's not like some crazy revelation, but it was like, oh, okay, I guess that actually works out and makes sense.
Sure.
Okay, so yeah, and I'll kind of tell you it when we get there, because that's part of it. And what's nice too, for those of you out there, physical collectors as well, I've been perusing the omnibus, with the first volume of it, which ends on I think it ends right after that issue 8. It might have a little bit more than that, but they actually include the excerpts from Original Sin. So it's issue 25, and then it's like 5 pages of Original Sin that shows him losing it, and then it goes. And I was like, that's awesome. Like and it doesn't even say it on the back cover that it includes those pages, which was really nice to see. But yeah, so we'll start at the beginning so we can get to that big reveal, because who knows? And that's what's funny is, I don't think this is going to be one of those cases where, and I think it's going to be hopefully for our benefit, like Miss Marvel, where they have a lot of these comic book accurate pieces to the movie, but there's a lot that there's no way they're going to be able to cover with this.
Mhm.
And so they've kind of skipped over that, right? Of like, Thor can lift Mjolnir still. He's not unworthy. This is just a second hammer. And we still don't really know. Like this, it appears that it's Mjolnir reconstructed
Mhm.
by some form or magic. But in the comics, he is unable to lift it. And I'll tell you guys why as we get there. So this starts out again. This was like primo time to be a comic book fan. This was at the beginning of Marvel Now, which was and I loved this time period because I still remember it to this day when they made the big announcements and they said we want to make our comic book covers feel more like movie posters where the title of the comic may not exactly be at the very top of the cover. It may be somewhere random as long as it fits the art. And so you saw a lot of really cool comic book covers. Just as some backstory. But so Thor's story, the first 6 issues is all around, first 12, it's all around the God Butcher. So Gore the God Butcher, you're going to see some, and I have a bunch of comic book shots for everybody. So this first one we'll pull up. This is from one of the first or second issues. This is taken directly, the movie has taken it directly from the comic, but that shot up here at the top is identical. But essentially he is told by or he hears a prayer, and this is I thought was so cool. He hears somebody's prayer across the cosmos. They're praying for rain or something like that. There's been no rain, and so he comes there. He brings the storm, and he's like, "Where are your gods?" And they're like, "We don't have any. Like we've never really had any gods." And he's like, "That's kind of weird." And so then he starts to investigate and notices there are a lot of planets and worlds that don't have gods. And he starts figuring, he's like, this is, and to me, that's like the coolest mystery ever. Like the fact that Gore has been in business for what seems to be a very long time and no one has caught him. And so he heads to the pure bureaucracy of it's like the Library of Worlds, where the guy who shows up, the librarian, like already doesn't like Thor. He's like, oh, you're in the wrong area, please put your hammer down. And he's like, no, I need to find out about these gods. And they're like, they've gone missing. And he's like, basically like, well, when does a god ever go missing? Like, how
But
is
also,
this
like,
not serious enough?
but also, how do you define when is it missing? Like, when does missing become an issue? Like,
Right.
like for a god, like, is it like 1,000 years? Is it 10,000 years? Is it like 100,000 years? Like that's what he was trying to figure. He was like questioning of like, how long has it been since they've been missing?
Yep. Yeah, and so cool in and of itself. Again, if you've never read any of this stuff before, it honestly, like I said, these 12 issues are so good and I feel like such a great primer for this movie. Honestly, you should read the Jane Foster story too because it's incredible as well. But like for the mystery and the intrigue of this, you're like, and it's kind of the same with Jane, right? Of who's under the helmet, but this one's like, who is killing all of these gods? And so you start to see. At the same exact time, the mystery triples, and we get not only Thor investigating this, we then get stories from Thor in the future, King Thor, that takes place like a couple thousand years in the future, where he is now the king of Asgard. He's one of the few beings left in existence. And again, credit to Jason Aaron. This is his storyline. And I loved this because I was reading some interviews of, that he had done for Jane Foster's Thor and was saying nothing in this should feel new to anybody. He was like, every single thing that I write is from my prior writings. And he was like, and I noticed this too because and I took it off the overlay because it was too small. But there's a piece where King Thor says something to the other Thor when they're fighting Gore towards the end. And he's like, do you not understand? I am the way and the wrath and the wonder. And Odin says that exact same thing in the Jane Foster issues that we read as well, being the All-Father too. And same thing, Roz Solomon shows up in issue 12. But then she's also the whole storyline for the last days of Midgard. And then she's now suspect number 1 as to who Jane might be. So he threads these stories throughout. And then the final piece of his run too is he does a King Thor 4-issue story where Gore comes back. And we figure out why. We learn all this. Like he is a master storyteller. And so King Thor in the future is fighting off these black beasts from Gore Doesn't really know what's going on, though. We're thrust right into the middle of this story. And then at the same time, young Thor, who is not yet worthy to wield the hammer, he uses Yarnborn, the giant axe, which is very similar to Stormbreaker. That's I think some of what they inspired it from Stormbreaker, at least the blade portion of it. But it's like, and I think it gets infused in the Jane Foster run or something to where like that axe can kill a god. Like that's one of the objects that can be used to kind of kill a god. And he is meeting Gore for the first time in the past. And so as present day Thor is investigating, he's starting to get these clues like, oh, I think I know who this is. And because again, yeah, and that's what I loved. Like Thor's been around for 1,500, 2,000 years. So like he forgot, but he's like, oh, now it's all coming back to me. So in the past, we start to see Thor interacting with Gore for the first time, which is just an absolute nightmare. You know, he's like the hero of Scandinavia, basically. Norse people are worshiping him, and Gore just wrecks shop. He's killing a bunch of people. There are gods falling from the sky. He ends up killing, and I thought that was really interesting. He kills like a Native American god, is from kind of what I took it. And he was like floating across the ocean and got to the shores of Scandinavia, and they're like, what is this going on? But then, you know, Gore shows up. And so super scary. We get, I think it's issue 6 is the backstory of Gore as well, which I'll pull this up. I thought was a really interesting picture. That he lives on a planet that also has no gods, or at least no gods that listen. And that story is really sad, and I love it. He, you know, his whole existence, everyone has told him like, oh, you need to pray for rain. You need to pray to the gods. If you die, you're going to get to go live in the stars with all of the other gods. And he's like, why are we praying to them if they aren't helping us? Or like, why do you die so young here? What, all of these questions that no one is willing to answer, to the point that they exile him. And he's like, well, this is just garbage. Like, you guys are living a lie. There's no one here to help you. The days are getting worse. Everyone's dying. It's like a desert planet, basically. But so he sees these two gods fall from the sky fighting, and he like helps the black one sort of, and sees him end the gold one. And he was like, oh, you know, can you help me? And he's like, help you? Like, when did you ever help me? And he kills that god too. But he takes his weapon, which we find out, and this is another huge piece of comic book lore, is all black, the Necro Sword, which Donny Cates then turns in the future into, that is Null's blade. So that blade is actually, and it's funny because you see it, that blade is a symbiote, or is made from the symbiote. So that's why the black tendrils are everywhere, and he sucks the life out of people and all this stuff. What did you think of all of that?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it's an interesting story approach to do the 3 storylines like concurrently, to have like to show, so you get bits and pieces of it from like the very beginning of it and then the middle, and they all kind of progress like in the same direction. Like you have your points for each, and they all like go in the same direction. It's not like the future story goes like back and then forward, and you know, but like everything is all kind of like those 3 storylines. They pick their starting points, and they all kind of go parallel to each other, you know, as you're revealing things. Yeah, and then Gore, yeah, his story, like, yeah, it's like that's something I was curious about. I was like, why, like, how did he become a god? But you're like, why is he going after the gods? And yeah, and the story that, like you said, yeah, it's him and his community is they're praying to the gods and they're not doing anything. And then after like 3 major hardships that like affect him, he's just finally like, I'm done. Like, I just don't want to, like, why are we praying to these beings that they're obviously not there, or they're not listening, or they don't care, you know? And then, yeah, when he gets exiled, he's about to die. And then, yeah, he sees these gods coming, and then, yeah, taking the weapon. He's like, he leaves and is like, I've already killed one. Like, now there must be more. Like, I got to go kill those other ones, you know? So, yeah. And then the fact reading, or at least looking at it, knowing later that I didn't know that it was connected to the symbiotes and everything, you know, like I thought that was cool just to have that knowledge as I was reading all of it and everything, you know, so that was pretty cool. But like, it's going to be interesting, at least in the movie, if because obviously all the symbiote stuff is like owned or controlled by Sony. So like, but we did have at the end of No Way Home, the little Venom goop stay on Earth. So like, who knows if Sony let them play ball and like have the connection there or something. And if they don't, it's like, I wonder if they're even going to mention it or just going to be like, it's a sword that looks sort of similar or something, I don't know.
Well, and we also, though, didn't we kind of call out that Hela's sword in Ragnarok was basically the incarnation of All Black.
Right.
So it'll be interesting to see if that was that Gore's to begin with, or is that nothing to do with Gore? And again, they change it for the movie and I'm excited for that. Like I honestly, I don't think the weapon makes the person. So I'm okay with whatever they do. And they've clearly taken some liberties on what Gore looks like too, which makes total sense because he's an absolute creep in the comics. And I don't think that would translate very well into the movie, especially to get any sympathy for him. But yeah, you're right. So he loses, if I'm remembering right, he loses his mom.
Yep.
His dad was gone before we knew it, but then he's married with a child, and both his wife and his child die. Same thing.
One of his children. Well, it's I thought it was. They have a child, and his wife is pregnant with another child, I believe. And so
you are correct. Yes.
Yeah. And then the wife and the unborn child die.
Yeah. And so he essentially kind of takes up this mantle. This may or may not be a something for later, but he basically deems that no god is worthy, worthy for anything. They're not worthy for worship. They are not worthy to be alive. And so his whole goal is if he eliminates all of the gods and kills all of them, then we can all just go back to living our normal lives. We won't have to worry about relying on these strangers from the stars. Like we can rely on each other and trust each other. And that's what leads to the second arc of this, which is mind-blowing reading it a second time through this time. We hear about there's a god that shows up that Thor finds named Shadrach. And he says that he's like, I don't even remember what he lies, though. He says, oh, I'm the god of like stories or something like that.
He lies each time, pretty much. Every time somebody asks, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it turns out though, and that's the title of this next series is called God Bomb. We find out Shadrach is actually the god of bombs, and so we find at the end of this, Gore reveals again. He says, "I'm the god of bombs." He's like, "I'm sorry, I lied," and we see this giant Death Star on this planet, and it's like, oh no, what's been going on? You even see some hands down there at the bottom of people being tied up. Very crazy. But it turns out that Gore has spent the last like 900 years building this bomb, enslaving gods, capturing them and making them build this bomb. But because, again, he used the god of bombs of this, whatever culture that was, to create a bomb that kills through time. So not only would it kill all of the gods now, it would kill every single god in the past, in the future. It basically bleeds through time. And it was one of those things where even as I was reading it, I was still like, this is bordering on, it doesn't make sense. But it was close enough to where I'm hanging on to Thor's hammer for the ride as it carries me because it was so cool. But I'm like, how exactly does it work? And then so a piece of it and kind of what ties the three Thors together is there's like a not a wishing well, but kind of like a reflecting pool that he finds another god who's like in charge of it on this planet. And essentially this pool, when you drop a little bit of your blood in the pool, allows you to travel through time. And so he like spills so much blood in this pool because he needs all of it, right? To be able to, for the bomb to travel everywhere and not just a small portion of time. But that's how both Thor and young Thor end up with King Thor at the point of the bomb being ready to go off in the future. They go through this portal basically. So again, kind of confusing as you're reading it, but it ends up nice because we get some great shots of all three of them together. They show up and they're like, how do we, and this is after the fact too, because the young Thor has been captured by Gore and he's crucified. He is put down. He's made a slave to build this stuff. He also meets Thor's granddaughters, or his own granddaughters, I guess you could say, who are awesome and play a big role in a lot of the future storylines. But here's where you see them for the first time. And so he escaped. He ends up escaping and meeting up with the other two Thors. And so we get this thing. Great shot again at the end of it. Every single one of these, you'll see, they all say to be continued. Great splash pages at the end of each of these comic issues, making you want more. Now we let the hammers talk, is what the Thor decides, and all three of them have hammers. So we find out in the future now that, and I loved this, Gore has recreated his family. He has a wife and a son again. And we get his wife. His son says at this point, once it's finally you've killed all the gods, you'll be free. He says, we all will. And he says, I've dreamed of that day for a very long time. But tell me, oh, that's his wife. What comes after? And that is one of the best questions in this run that Jason does a really good job of kind of answering. And I'll point out too, this whole time, this is Esau Ribic who's doing the art. Phenomenal art too, really captures the kind of Norseness of all of it. But his wife says the same thing. She's like, this is amazing. You're a god now, basically. Like, look what you've done. And he's like, what did you call me?
Yeah.
And he kills her. And his son, his fake son, sees it happen. And he knows, and that ends up being his undoing, is that his son decides to team up with Thor for a bit. Or his son actually ends up kind of putting the final blow into his dad before disappearing. But saying, like, you've amassed all of this power trying to, and it's the classic story, right? Like, you've amassed all this power trying to take down those in power, but now you've become the person that you hate. And he refuses to acknowledge that. And I thought that whole concept, that conversation was super interesting, that he doesn't see himself as that. He still sees himself as the low man on the totem pole, yet he is beyond powerful at this point.
Yeah, that was a great, like, I definitely felt as I was reading and, like, yeah, I saw the conversations with his wife and his son, like, feeling as though, yeah, Gore had become a god. So it's like, you kept saying, like, what happens after? And you're like, well, yeah, now he's the god. So, like, does that mean he has to like, butcher himself? Or, like what, you know, like, and so, like, that was the whole question and the paradox of it all and whatnot. But I think, at least as we're going to see, I wonder if, I don't necessarily think we're going to have, like, time elements in play for, with a god bomb or anything in the movie. I mean, we might have a god bomb, but I don't know if it would probably just be like everybody, like, here and now.
Right, and maybe, like, he already built it and just that's it.
Right, but if we do, I mean, I feel like that would be a good way to, if at all, of, like, if the TVA is involved at all, because I mean that's kind of like been our currently our introduction,
it's like a form of pruning.
Yeah, because the I'm pretty sure in the comic they were that pool and whatever, it was like the Kronos god or something with
That's
Kronos,
right, you're
I
right.
think.
Yep.
Yeah, so like
it was not Chronopolis, but it was something similar to that.
Yeah, so I feel like that could easily become, oh well, we have the TVA and, like, our city and, like, you know, and, like, all that stuff. So I feel if that is involved, like, I don't think it is, but I think if it would be, I think the TVA would be a good vessel for that part of the story. But it's interesting though that if it is in the present, like, so far we've seen obviously the Norse gods with Asgardians. We have just been introduced to Egyptian gods with Moon Knight, and then we still have the Wakandan gods in theory, you know. So, like, those are, like, our three areas of, and I guess maybe the Eternals technically might be gods in a sense to some people, you know. So, like, and I guess out in space we have Celestials. Those are like space gods or whatever, you know. So I guess those are, like, our pillars of gods. But I feel like we're gonna see a bunch, like what this story did, of, like, just showed, like, these very, like, in these other cultures, these gods,
right, like, really, like, random, or gods.
Random, yeah. And I think that's what a lot of the deaths are gonna be, you know, because you can't introduce all these, like, giant gods that either in our world's mythology or in the comics mythology of we haven't even gotten the Olympians really. I mean, we see Zeus is going to be in this, you know, but, like, you can't just, like, introduce those, like, right away and then without, like, building them up some, you know. Like, I think some, like we've all speculated, like, nobody thinks Zeus is going to be long for this world because of all of that, you know. But so yeah, I think a lot of those smaller random gods are going to be much of the folly for the God Butcher and such, you know. But in terms of the comic storyline, yeah, having all three of them come to that future point and then working together to help destroy the bomb and, you know, and everything. And it's, it was an interesting approach and storyline to, like, get all these three versions. Cause I think even at the end, they're like, King Thor like uses the All Father power and the Odin Force to. They all get sent back, but then like they lose their memories of all that because Jason Aaron cleans up the time travelness and the rules and all, so like he cleans it up so that like they were all there when they needed to be, and then they go away and they don't ever remember the futures, at least for the other two, the futures of what's happening and everything. So
yeah, very, very convenient. But again, I'm on the seat of my pants, so I'm like, just that's fine. I'll take it. So yeah, they get to a point again where they're fully tag teamed. I'm about to share with you an amazing splash page of it says, then struck Thor with the fury of a billion storms as all three of them go after Gore down there in the bottom right corner. And it was an absolutely epic fight. There's King Thor shooting Odin Force out of his fist. Insane. Love this part of the bottom again. Esau just killing it on the art with Gore looking absolutely terrified. It says the Butcher of Gods knew fear. Which is crazy. But then we find out again, like that there's nothing they can do to stop the bomb going off. So what happens? Thor absorbs the bomb using both Mjolnirs, which was insane. And again, it says every god in all the universes closed their eyes and prayed to Thor. Like it's so metal. I love it. And then we see Thor completely engrossed in black. And he's like, no, give it back. But then we get another gorgeous splash page of him just wrecking Gore. Again, Gore must be very powerful because, I don't know, I feel like one hammer would have done me in. But two hammers plus the lightning plus the symbiote is not enough. And again, he ends up coming back, and it's interesting in the future. I won't spoil how he comes back. It makes total sense. And it's not because he wanted to come back. He actually is very pissed that he has to come back because what does he say? Okay, so no, and it's not that big a deal. So basically in this scene, essentially what happens is afterwards, Thor sends the entire planet, the whole bomb, Gore, the Necro Sword, everything into a black hole.
Yeah.
And what Gore reveals is that in that black hole, he became trapped inside of the Necro Sword. And he says all that he had was him, his thoughts, and complete darkness. And he said, for the first time in my life, I was happy and I was at peace. And so I don't remember what it was that caused him to come back, but he is so mad that he did. But I was like, a fitting end for him, right? Like he's dead. He can't do much more harm, but he also gets what he wants, which was to not have to stress anymore. So it ended up being all's well that ends well. We get a great bit here, too, that I thought was a little bit of foreshadowing. We see in, like, the 6th issue, he goes to visit Jane, finds out she has cancer, and she doesn't want the help. But then in this scene, same, he goes back after his battle to visit, and she's like, don't you dare help me or whatever. But he's like, well, let me at least take you somewhere. And so he takes her to the moon. And so that adds up as to how did Jane end up on the moon to pick up Mjolnir? Well, now I'm remembering, right? She's been there before, so she knew how to get there when it called her. We also get, so look, he says, breathtaking as they sit there and watch the sunrise over Earth. And then we get, again, another, I'd argue you could say they're throwaway issues, issue 6 and 12, but they're very important because you've got Gore's backstory, different artist. And then on this one, funny enough, it's Nick Klein who does the art, who's doing current Thor right now with Donny Cates. But we get the intro of Roz Solomon. And so she even says here too, she says, I'm more like an environmental scientist, but with a gun. And she goes, I don't know if I get a flying car or not. And you see in some of the Jane Foster run, when she comes in, it says, Roz Solomon, an environmentalist, but with a gun. And she's using a flying car. So she ends up getting what she wants, which was great. Again, that issue 12 sets a lot of Easter eggs for the rest of the run. We get a bit about Malekith, and so it's like, oh, there's your prep for War of the Realms. You get the Roz bit, you get the Roxxon bit. I love everything about Roxxon. I love that. Just Dario Agger is one of my favorite villains because he's so smart and cunning, and he's a Minotaur, and so we get to kind of see that as we jump into Jane Foster. But again, from that space, Thor has a couple more adventures, and then he ends up in Original Sin, where Nick Fury from space, Cyber Nick Fury, who has the eye of the Watcher, he knows everybody's secrets. He whispers to Thor, Gore was right. And that is what causes him to drop his hammer, because Gore said no god is worthy. And he apparently believed him. I still struggle with that, because I'm like, just because someone says it doesn't really mean that it's true. But apparently it was for Thor. And that was enough of a sting to be like, wow, I guess you're right. Gore was right. And so he drops the hammer and he can no longer lift it until he figures out, what that means. I guess we don't really get a lot of answers, at least right now. But so what happens is we see someone else pick up the hammer in absolutely gorgeous Russell Dowderman fashion. Esad, I love you, buddy. You're doing great on Eternals. You did great on Thor. But Russell, man, welcome to the party. Russell's one of my favorite artists of all time. His color, I mean, the colors, I think is Matt Wilson who does the colors, but just the crispness, the life that's brought in through here, the way he designs lightning, the way he designs clouds, all of it just feels so real and perfect, and it's the opposite of static, very kinetic. And then the colors are just gorgeous. But yeah, so we get a tale from Thor issues 1 through 8 of her not only battling Roxxon and Malekith. The Frost Giants have invaded to steal back a skull that Roxxon got from Antarctica or something like that, or the bottom of the ocean. The skull of Laufey, actually, who is dead. And but at the same time, she's trying to fight. At the same time, Thor is trying to come to grips with not being worthy, why someone else picked it up, why it was this person that picked it up. We still, again, don't know who it is, but we get a lot of classic tropes in here about why is a woman wielding the hammer, from Odin specifically, who has a great storyline in here too, where he is basically like the old boomer at this point. And this drove me nuts, but also was like made total sense for beings that have been together for millennia, like him and his wife. He just shows up and he's like, all right, woman, I'm back. And it's like, okay, but she's still in charge. And he keeps acting like she's not. He brings in Kull from Fear Itself, which was the prior Thor run with Matt Fraction. And he is a bad guy. And people are like, he's a bad guy, but no one's doing anything about it. And so you've got these warring factions. And that ends up being kind of the beginnings of the War of the Realms, the beginnings of the downfall of Asgardia, of just this idea that there was some measure of peace when Frigga was running things. And now that Odin's here, it's like, Odin's essentially Trump in this is how I would describe it. Just very curmudgeonly, and he tries to steal back the hammer from Stop the Steal is probably what he was saying as the what'd you make of these Jane issues?
Yeah, I thought it was a good it played well with the mystery of who the character was, because I think it's in the first issue, right before we see the splash page of her holding the hammer, like Odin and Freya are like having Odin's like upset that Thor can't lift the hammer anymore or whatever, and they're like all on the moon around him and
right.
and everything, and then you get like a look at Freya, and then you see the hammer change from the inscription to say like, be she worthy or whatever, so I wondered if, obviously, because I know it was Jane, it was like I wondered if she adjusted the curse or something, like if she was the one to adjust it to then make to make it open to anybody, or like whatever, because she was like to spite him or whatever. But that was a good tease of like, oh, is Thor like Freya because of her doing that, or like the way that the panels were laid out, it made it look like she was going towards the hammer and was able to lift it. But then as we go through the 8 issues, either by Thor or just by the way the story unfolds, like Jason Aaron like knocks down all the various characters who potentially could be it, and there's the great scene of Thor like making a giant scroll of everybody that he thinks, and it was a good. I mean, I don't know how I would have felt as it came out, but I thought like reading it was a good misdirect, obviously, of establishing Jane with the cancer back in that issue 12, and then like in this series in like 4 or 5 or
it was issue 6
or issue 6.
Right.
Yeah.
You did a good lead with that, because you forget about it in issue 7. And so then you're not thinking about it that it's Jane anymore. So it was like really smart play.
Right. Yeah. It was a good misdirect of like clearly reestablishing, oh, she is like so weak and like the cancer or whatever, and like also maybe more or less trying to say, not that this is necessarily the case, but like if somebody does have cancer, they're probably not worthy to like hold the powers of a god or anything, like that. So like it definitely was, yeah, like the establishing of trying to go through it. And I mean, I thought, again, no, obviously knew it was Jane, but like as I was going, I think I definitely probably would have thought it was Roz, the Shield agent, because to me, my understanding, it was like, oh, they're trying to do a new Thor. They're going to be a woman or whatever, it's like, and this Roz just got introduced in this series. Like, okay, like that's like clearly like they're just trying to set this person up. So you have this like new character, like all part of Marvel now. And like, whatever, of like, you got new characters, new mantles and everything like that, so then it's a great scene when he's like in the last issue, they've just beat the Frost Giants and everything, and he's like, I'm not mad that you have the hammer. I may be a little jealous, like, sure, whatever, but like, just tell me, like, Roz, like, why are you worthy and whatever, like, please just tell me. And Jane's like, oh, like, I don't know, whatever. And then like he's just like, please, Roz. And then like up in the sky, and she comes out, and he's like dumb. He's got like this like double taken look on his face, and it's just like wait, what, you're not Roz? And then Jane just leaves, and then that's how it ends. She goes back to Asgard and Thor's, and you're like, oh, it's her and such. So
yeah, and I loved the choice too. It felt so special that we knew who it was, but that everyone in the story still didn't. Back when it came out, my guess was Freya, because when I was reading it, you'll remember the last scene before the hammer was her looking back at the hammer. And I was like, what if it's her and that's how she gets back at Odin?
Right.
So I was shocked too. But then when it came out, it was like, who else could it have been? Like, this was the perfect choice. It was the obvious choice. And they did such a good job of subverting it. And so I was very pleased with that. She does a great job as Thor. I love the idea. And this is something I'd be curious if you think this shows up in the movie. Obviously, there's no secret as to who she is in the movie, unless they make it so. All the trailers show her helmet as having her eyes open, whereas in the comic, that part's covered too, so you never see her eyes.
She also doesn't have blonde hair in this.
Exactly. I don't know if maybe the hair, maybe they're going to make it lighter. I don't know. It definitely looked lighter than normal because it looked like it had highlights in it. It did not look like it was full blonde. Yeah. But that was a big giveaway too. Was like, okay, this person has hair. Jane doesn't have any hair.
Yeah. I did read an interview that it was about what Natalie Portman did to get into get her jacked arms and everything. But it said because she's like 5'2", 5'3" or something, and I guess apparently in the movie, the mighty Thor is 6 feet is tall.
Oh,
so
wow.
they were just talking about like this like ramp or like this or whatever that they had to use for filming so that Jane or Natalie Portman could walk next to Chris Hemsworth and like be like a similar height or whatever. And
that's
like,
pretty cool.
And then like they were saying like Chris like had to like hop over it or whatever, but like still make his like upper torso be like not look like he's like hopping or so, like it sounded like they were trying to as best they could like without like just cutting her out and then like stretching her or whatever they were gonna do or whatever. But so I thought that was interesting because at least in these 8 issues, as far as we didn't obviously see her not as Jane or whatever, but we didn't really tell if there was a height difference, with the drawing on the page, at least in this series so far, that'll be interesting. Like you said, in the movie, what obviously it appears that it's more of a known thing, that it's not really, there's not really a mystery behind who it is.
And part of me wonders too, because if you remember, and I loved the way that he wrote it like this, but like her mental notes or her thought bubbles were very unsure, very naturally spoken. And when you read it again and you're like, it's Jane Foster, you're like, yep, all of this lines up with how Jane would speak. But when she speaks as Thor, she's completely different. She's a complete badass. Her words often contradict what she's thinking. There was a moment too, I remember what she was talking about. She was like, how do I know that? It was something about some history of Asgard. And she was like, how do I even know that, as she was saying it? And so I'm curious if that will play a part in this as well, or if it's just again, I'm just so curious to see, because they're obviously embracing the Jane Foster identity, but what other pieces of the comic are they embracing? Because I saw a small interview real briefly where she was saying, Taika Waititi, and I'm sure they do this with everybody, right? But like gave her the Jane Foster comics to read. So she knows what the character is in the comic. So I'll just be curious to see what's different, because again, I'm easy peasy either way. I think she's a new enough character, just like Miss Marvel, where the MCU's in a great spot to be able to define who this is. And I guess time will only tell what kind of happens next with her character. Do you think that she is a Thor Love and Thunder character, or do you think she's an MCU character?
I hope she's an MCU character, but I have a feeling she could just be a Thor Love and Thunder and maybe one other thing. Maybe I just knowing who Natalie Portman is, and I mean, obviously she had not necessarily bad blood, but like there was some like after Thor Love and Dark World, like obviously she didn't appear again, and like I think she definitely didn't, as far as I know, I think didn't have the best time on Dark World, and then obviously but that was all partially because of the story committee and everything that was involved and everything like that, and obviously when Kevin Feige and Taika like reached out for this one or whatever, she got to play something that wasn't just a love interest, and and that's also what Taika and Kevin Feige and then Chris Hemsworth, they didn't want to do with the character anyways, so I would love to have her continue with Chris Hemsworth or just by herself as like the Thor character on this new Avengers team that we're hopefully gonna get or something, but I also feel there's I think I saw a brief quote. I didn't really see the whole thing, but like Chris Hemsworth and Kevin Feige were saying like they're just starting to scratch the surface of all the other Thor types, like because I mean there's still Beta Ray Bill. We could have Frog, Thunderstrike, so it's possible we could get other, or Valkyrie could become the Thor-esque character in the MCU or something, so I can see, I'll put it this way, I can see Tessa Thompson sticking around more at this point than Natalie Portman would,
Sure.
So I think they're gonna leave hopefully Valkyrie in either as Valkyrie or a Valkyrie Thor-esque hybrid or something as like the Thor character maybe. But I'd love to have Natalie Portman and Jane stick around past this movie, especially to have like team ups with other people and other characters would be
really because she was on the Avengers for a while during that same time period. She was on the all new Avengers along with, it was her, and here maybe we do that, right? That was the Mark Waid run. It was her, Sam Wilson as Captain America, Miss Marvel, Vision, Nova, basically all the Champions kids plus them. I think maybe Spider-Man was in it as well. But yeah, there's another team. The thing I will say too is if they don't kill her in this movie, I bet you they'll make another one, because Kevin Feige said in an interview, and maybe that was the same one, where he said that they haven't even told the greatest Thor stories yet. And I was like, that's pretty brave to say before this movie comes out. But some of the future Jane Foster stories in this run are absolutely incredible, including the last one, which is the death of Thor. And that to me is probably one of the best stories ever, because again, she's having to deal with this fact that every time, you don't see it in these 8 issues, she doesn't explain it yet, but every single time she powers up, the might of Mjolnir, the power of Thor, is canceling out her cancer treatment. So every time she does it, she's dying faster. So eventually she will die. She does die. But that whole thing is completely beautiful. She gets to go to Valhalla. She gets to come back as a Valkyrie. So there's a lot of cool stories for her to be told. It just depends, like you said, is Natalie Portman willing to do it? I hope so. I want her to, but I know her too. I wouldn't be surprised if she said no and this was a one-time deal. And if so, do they make that the whole story for this? I hope not, because that's a lot to fit in one movie that's less than 2 hours.
Yeah, and I think as much as I enjoy the aspect of her having the cancer and everything, and they've kind of hinted, but it's still kind of tiptoed around that for the MCU. Like I wouldn't, I kind of don't want that to an extent, because like I would want Jane Thor to like stick around. Like I'd want it so that they either find a balance of like she does do something and the cancer kind of goes away, and then but she's still worthy to have Thor, or it's something where she's just like in this like it's a frozen state essentially, where she's dying slowly but maybe not as fast, or just so that we would, like you said, not unlike the comics where she would die and come back as a Valkyrie. Like I'd like her to like stay as the Thor.
Yeah, like they could
If you
milk
can,
that to the point where we know, maybe we know she has cancer in this movie, but we don't know what the effects of being Thor are. And maybe you find that out at the end of another movie, that like, oh, every time she's doing this, it's, taking away her treatment. So you still get like another movie, maybe put her in a show, put her in another movie by that time. Again, I think that's a lot to ask from Miss Natalie Portman,
Mm-hmm.
but I'll ask it. Send me there and I'll ask it in person. I'm not afraid to say, please just stay with us a little longer. But yeah, so I'm not sure. But overall, like I said, I think these stories are perfect for anyone wanting to scratch the surface for this movie, to maybe go into it with a little bit of comic book knowledge, or if you're watching this after the movie, to go check it out. Were any of our predictions on this show right? I'll be very curious to see. We are, as of this premiering, we are 2 days away from Thor coming out. Unfortunately, we are not there in real time as we record, though. We still got a week and 2 days. But Kevin, I'm so excited for this movie. You there? Can you hear me?
Yep, I'm there, dude.
Oh,
yeah.
Nice.
Went away.
Oh, okay, then that's my bad. No, I was just saying I'm super
Mm-hmm.
excited for this movie. You got tickets to go see it yet?
I do. Yes, I'm going with our good friend Ryan from the Agents of Field podcast.
Nice.
Because we are both in the same city, so we can go together, and also with my a couple of my other friends. So yeah, we're doing Dolby Cinema this time. We usually do IMAX, but we chose to do Dolby Cinema. And assuming I like it, then I'll probably go back to IMAX to see it, because the one we go is a really giant screen and it's really great to watch these films on. So, but we'll see how Dolby Cinema ends up.
I'm a big Dolby fan. I'm going to see it in Dolby twice. So we'll see if there's any 3D aspects to this. Maybe I'll try and see it in 3D too. But we will have all of that here. So as you guys see this, again, our next episode will be our Thor review that myself and Anthony from Agents of Field are going to be diving into and talking about. So look forward to that. But for now, and for Comics and Cinema, Kevin, thank you for coming. I'm your host, Alex Klein, and we will see you